We're on Tesvav Amid Beis now, on the top. And we're up to V'chol Zeh in the second line. So we're interpreting different psukim in the Megillah. Kol Zeh Eino Shaveh Li. So Haman declares that this whole thing is worthless, even though his family tries to encourage him. Look how important you are. You're second in command, and you're a very wealthy person in addition. But he says, no, it's all worthless to me. He had some sort of a record in which he wrote down all his assets, and he kept it near his heart because he was suffering from various different typhus, one of which was typhus mama. When he sees Mordechai, he declares Kol Zeh Neshavel. Anything that's Zeh, say he's pointing to his chest where he has this whole list attached to his body, it's worthless to me. The Bali Musas say that when a person is jealous of someone, then all the wealth in the world is not going to help. He still remains jealous. In this case, it's more than just jealousy, it's also hatred. Now, we've been studying Rabbi Lazar, who quotes Rabbi Hanina. We're going to add another statement that has to do with the reward for the tzaddikim from that same transmission. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Hanina, Asid HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Leos Atara Barosh Kol Tzadik V'Tzadik. In the future, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu divvies out reward, he's going to be like a crown on the head of every single tzaddik. And now, where do we derive this from? This is from Pasuk in Yeshayahu and Navi. Bayoma hu yi Hashem tzvakos lateres tzvi v'gomer. On that day, God, who's the master of the legions, will be a crown of beauty and for a diadem of glory. Now, the rest of the pasuk is kedai to read because the Gemara is going to darshan the rest of the pasuk as well. And it says, La teres tzvi uletzfiras tifara l'shar amo uleruach mishpat liyoshev ala mishpat ulegvura b'shivei milchama sha'ara. And a spirit of judgment to him that sits in judgment, and for strength to those who turn back the battle to the gate. They also reel through wine and stagger through strong drink. To'u min shechar, nivlu min yayin, to'u min shechar, shagu b'rosh b'roeh paku plilo. They are confused by wine, they stagger through strong drink, they err in vision, they stumble in judgment. He dashes it. L'ruach mishpat, zeh adon es yitzvah. So the first part of the pasuk, just 1 second, I think I skipped something here, sorry. He says, Mai la teres tzvi u'tzfiras tifara, a crown of beauty and a diadem of glory. Li'osim tzivyono u'lemitzapim tifarta, for those who fulfill the will of God and await His glory. Yochel hakol, does that mean that this ateres is given to anyone? In other words, anyone who fulfills the will of God, even if he's not the outstanding tzaddik, he also would merit this reward of ateres tzvi. Talmud Lomar, there's a miyut in the pasuk. It says l'shar amo, the remnant of his people. And what does that mean, the remnant of his people? The Gemara darshans the word l'shar, l'misha meisanato kishirayin, meaning he's humble. And then the pasuk says u'leruach mishpat. Here is more of rewards for the righteous people. So what is the judgment here that's indicated by this pasuk? And the Gemara says that this is really a self-judgment. A person who judges himself, and that's going to engender feelings of tshuva. V'layoshev al mishpat zadon din emes lamito. This already refers to judges, and they will judge in an honest way. So, for example, there's something called a din meruma, where the judges have a sense that the witnesses are perjuring themselves. They can't prove it. So, in such a case, the judges should remove themselves from the judgment. And what the pasuk is really indicating is that you need drishas v'chakiras, that the judges should be very careful about interrogating the Eidim and investigating them and trying to determine whether they're telling the truth or not. Then the pasuk says, "U'legvura zemesgaber yitzor," he overcomes his yetzer. Meshive milchama, he gives back a battle. Shenosim v'nosim milchamta shel Torah, that when there are Torah discussions, he will jump into the battle. This is called milchamta shel Torah. That's why the Ramban's work on the Balamor, it's called Milchemes Hashem, the battle of God. Sha'ara, Elu, Talmidi Chacham Shemashkim Marivim V'bote Knesius V'bote Midrash. They're at the gates. They come early, they leave late, and they're there to open up the shuls and the study houses. Amra Midas Hadin L'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now we get to the next pasuk where the Midas Hadin is arguing in front of God. Why is it that you give such rewards to the people of Israel, and it sounds like you're excluding the other nations of the world? This has always been the argument of the Malachim. Like, for example, at Kriyas Yamsuf, when the Malachim said, Elu ve'elu, they're both of the Avodah Zarah. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael askin b'Torah. The Jewish people dedicate themselves to the study of Torah. Amalei, so Midas Hadin responds, what about the Rishayim of Klal Yisrael? And that's the end of this pasuk. They reel through wine, stagger through strong drink, and they stumble in judgment. How do we know this pasuk is a reference to Gehenna? Ein paku ella Gehenna. Shenemar of pasuk in Shmuel, Velosia zos lechol lefuka. It shall not be a cause of stumbling to you. Ve'ein plilia ella dayanim. The word plilia always refers to judges. Shenemar v'nasan b'plilia. Vatamod, we go back to the Megillah, B'chatzar Beis HaMelech HaPnimis, and now Esther is trying to get an audience with the king, with Achashverosh. So she stands in the court, the inner court, HaPnimis, of the king's house. Omar Levi came to Gia Beis HaTzlomim. In order to get through the court into the king's house, she had to pass by the chamber of idols. And until this point, we saw that she was guided by Ruach HaKodesh. But now, Nistalku Mimena Shechina. The Shechina declares, I'm allergic to this place. There's Avodah Zarah here. I can't be here. Amar, she declares, when she sees that the Shechina has departed from her and she's all alone, and she's about to enter into the king to plead on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Keli Lama Zatar. This is the 22nd chapter of Tehillim, which is called Lamil Tseach LaYelos HaShachar. Yelos HaShachar is an allusion to Esther. The entire chapter and the whole kapitel of Beis is all about Esther, mostly about the prayers and supplications of Esther at the time of this great crisis. And now she cries out, Lama Zavtani. Shema Tadon al Shogei Kemezid. Are you going to judge me in a situation of Shogei where I wasn't intentionally violating the law of God? And are you going to consider it as if it was intentional? Val ones kerotzon. This is a situation that's thrust upon me, and I'm being coerced. Are you going to treat me like it was a rotzon, as if I had will and that's why you are leaving me, and therefore I'm all alone without divine help. Now, here there's a little bit of a pella. The Maharsha points out that she considers herself to be an ones. That's not really true, because in the previous Gemara, when she tells Mordechai, Kasher Avadati Avadati, the Gemara interprets that to mean that she can no longer resume her relationship with Mordechai. According to that man, the Yomi says she was married to Mordechai, because if a married woman willingly goes in to have a relationship with another man, she can never ever live with her husband. So we see that her situation vis-a-vis Achashverosh, that intimacy, was not a coercion. It wasn't onus. If it would have been onus, then she's not prohibited to return to her husband, to Mordechai, according to that. So the Maharsha basically comes up with two different dimensions. Now, as far as her relationship with her husband, this cannot be considered onus, because she actively pursued this intimacy. She made that decision. But as far as judging her, she feels that she should be judged as if she were an onus. In halachic terms, legally, in terms of her relationship with her husband, that's one thing. But in terms ben adam l'makom, in her standing in front of the Ribono Shel Olam, her status, she feels that she is an onus. She didn't make any of these decisions just for her own benefit. Chas v'shalom. She was only interested in saving Klal Yisrael. Now she comes up with another thesis, an idea that crosses her mind as to why the Shekhinah departed from her, and why she's not feeling that sense of Siyata D'Shmai, being accompanied by God. Shema al shekrasib kelev. Is it possible that I'm guilty of disrespect to the king? And this whole concept of disrespect to the king is derived from Moshe Rabbeinu, who spoke to Paro in very respectful terms. He never scoffed or humiliated Paro, because Paro is the king. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in his divine providence, set up this person as the king. You have to treat him properly. And now she thinks that maybe she's guilty because initially she called Achashverosh a kelev. How do we know this? This we derive from a pasuk in Tehillim, in that same chapter we mentioned before, Chav Beis, Ayelas HaShachar, and it says there, Hatzila micherev nafshi miad kelev yichidasi, rescue my soul from the sword, my only one from the grip of the dog. And the grip of the dog is a metaphor for Achashverosh, the dog. And you don't talk about a king as a dog. And in fact, at the end of the same pasuk, the entire mood of the pasuk shifts. Chazro Gracia Aryeh. She calls Achashverosh a lion. Shenemar Hoshi'eni mipi Aryeh. And that's a much more respectful way of talking about Achashverosh. So she thinks that perhaps she wasn't careful to afford the proper honor to the king Achashverosh. Shah has a slightly different twist on this Gemara. And he says that these animals, the dog and the lion, are respectively allusions to Haman, who's compared to the dog, and Achashverosh, who's compared to the lion. And what Esther had assumed at first was that Haman was responsible for the plot, only exclusively, and therefore she called him a dog. But then she realized Achashverosh was also part of the plan. He was also perhaps at least a secondary adversary that brought about this terrible Gzeira, and therefore she adds the word lion. Vayikir os hamelchas Esther Amalka, and the king sees Esther Amalka, not exactly sure what's bothering the Gemara here. Again. I guess if I understand correctly, the word Vayehi indicates that something changed over here. Because Achashverosh had strict rules that no one would show up unless they were called upon. So Vayehi Kiros Hamelch Hasester Malki, he must have seen something, very special. Nothing here in the commentaries that I see over here, but the pasuk itself seems to indicate that like there was a change of heart. What exactly transpired here? Omar Rabbi Gimel Malach Yeshos Nistam Lo B'Yosa Shah Echad Shigbias Tzavara Echad Shemosha Chut Shel Chesed Levi Echad Shemotach Es Hasharvit. 3 malachim came down to help her at this point. And keep in mind, the reason why you need 3 malachim, as we saw at the beginning of Parashas Vayera, as Rashi says, Ein malach osa shtei shlichios. So each one of these malachim had his own mission. First was to raise up her neck. In other words, she was already drooping down from exhaustion. She had fasted for so long, 3 days consecutively. And that would not be an appropriate way of coming into the king. So she didn't have the strength to lift up her neck because of the fasting and the praying. So that malach lifted up her neck. The second one, Moshe Chut Shel Chesed Aleh, he endowed her with grace so that she would find favor in the eyes of Achashverosh. The third one, Basach Es Hasharim. When he stretched out the scepter, it was very far away from him. The Gemara is going to ask how far it was. But if not for a miracle that was implemented by a malach, the third of this trio of the 3 musketeers, she would not be able to grab onto the sharvit. The kama, and how long did the sharvit have to stretch out? For what distance? In order that she, Esther, could grab onto the sharvit. Amar Rav Yirya, Shtei Amos Haya Vehemidan al Shteimesre. The length of the sharvit was 2 amos, and it stretched an additional 10 or 12, all told 12 amos. Amilei Olisei Sheshesmei. Amilei Esrim V'Arba. Masisa Torah Shishin. There's so many different shitas about how much of a miracle there was, how much of a stretch there was. Now, the Maral adds another little point there. He says that the reason why the scepter had to be stretched, I mean, why couldn't Esther just move forward and grab onto the scepter when Achashverosh stretched his arm out? And the Maral says the following, that she was so exhausted that she couldn't even muster up the energy to go forward and grab on to the sharvit. So the sharvit had to come after her. Similar miracle we find with regard to Maspara. We read it in last week's Sedra. She came to reach for the teva of Moshe, and it was rolling down the Nile. She couldn't have possibly, based on natural law, have accessed the teva, but her arms stretched out miraculously. I think there's a comic strip called The Incredibles or something like that. They have one of the Incredibles, I think, is able to stretch his body or her body in all directions. Anyway, now we go back to Og Melech HaBosh. This is a whole story about Og in Masechet Brachos on Daf Nun Daled, because Og Melech HaBosh tried to lift up a mountain and drop it on Klal Yisrael. But God did a miracle, and the ants came and they drilled holes in this mountain that was being held over the head of Og, and then in addition, the teeth of Og stretched out 60 amma. Let's see if he says it here. Yeah, Og Melech HaBosh uprooted a mountain large enough to bury the entire camp of Israel, carried on his head, God sent ants to attack Og. They bored a hole in the mountain, causing it to sink around his neck. You know those things that people wear on a flight? You know, what are they called? So that's what this mountain was for Og Melech HaBashan. It was around his neck. And then there was another miracle. God extended Og's teeth on each side of his face so that he would not be able to remove the mountain from his head. The teeth came down and they prevented the mountain from going up. So he couldn't lift off the mountain. And the Gemara Bracha says that, and we'll see it here also, that stretch of his teeth was 60 amos. Okay, that's a pasuk in Tehillim. And Oresh Lakish, Al Tikri Shibarta, Ella Shirbavta. You extend. Rabba Bar Ofran, Omar Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Sheshom Mirabo, Rabbi Mabo, Masayim. That it stretched for 200 amos. Wow, must have been the longest sharvit in history. Vayomar Melech li Esther Malko Malach Esther Malko Ma Bakoshesech Ad Chatzi Amalchus V'Seos, up to half of the kingdom. What does that mean? Chatzi Amalchus Lo Kol Amalchus, up to but not including beyond half of the kingdom. Umay knew what was he trying to exclude? Binyan Beis Hamikdash. Yeah, he didn't even know she was Jewish, but somehow, probably in the subconscious mind, he wanted to preclude the building of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Maharsha points out here that the Beis Hamikdash is right in the middle of the earth. Second, where was that? Okay, I don't see it right now, but that's the thrust of what he's saying here, that Chatzia Malchus is a reference to the Beis Hamikdash because that was situated in the middle of the earth. Yavo Hamelech v'Haman al Mishteh. Why does Esther invite Haman to the Mishnah? Wouldn't it make more sense that she would invite only Achashverosh and try to get Achashverosh to repeal the decree? The Gemara is going to give a whole bunch of answers to this question. So we start with Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Pachim Tomnolo. That she was setting a trap for him. Shenemar. And we derive this from a pasuk in Tehillim. What does it say in Tehillim? Yehi shulchanam lifneim lefach. May their table become a trap before them. At the time when a person feels comfortable, right, he's sitting at the table, he feels that all is well, then he's particularly susceptible to a downfall, to a trap. Shenemar, just 1 second, sorry. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, mi beis avia lomta. Second answer as to why Esther invited Haman as well to this banquet. She derived it from Avia. Now, she didn't have a father. She was already an orphan at birth. So what does it mean, mi beis avia lomta? So Rashi says that she learned it from little children. That's called Beis Avia. She overheard young children reciting a verse that they studied in Cheder. And what was the verse in Ra'ev Sonacha Hachileu Lechem? Rabbi Meir has a third opinion. Why did Esther invite Haman? If Haman is left out, then he might already use that free time to take some sort of counsel and rebel against the king and take over the entire Malchus. The Rav Soloveitchik used to always say that we see from this that Haman really had aspirations to take over the Malchus. And Achashverosh, we'll soon see, was pretty nervous about that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, why did she invite Haman? Kadesh lo yakiru ba shehi Yehudis. Because if she was Jewish, why would she invite the arch enemy of the Jew, Haman? Now he has here a chiddush in the footnote. I'm not sure exactly where he sees this in the Gemara, that Esau is afraid that if Haman would find out that she's a Jew, he might set an earlier date for the annihilation of the Jews to prevent her from persuading the king to change his mind in the interim. So she was about to reveal at this banquet that she's a Jew. And if Haman would find out, behind the scenes, he would already start the annihilation of the Jews immediately. So, not waiting is urgent, because if he waits, maybe she'll convince Achashverosh to repeal the decree. Reb Nechemia over another explanation. Why did she invite Haman? Kidei shel Yomi Yisrael achos yesh lanu b'beis hamelech. V'yasichu daito min harachamim. I'm not exactly sure how she solved this problem by inviting Haman, but it says she didn't want the Jews to say, "Oh, you know what? We have a sister in the royal palace, and she'll certainly entreat the king on our behalf. We don't have to be worried," and therefore they will neglect praying for divine mercy. And why is that? Why is that caused by Haman not being invited? If she would invite him, I'm not sure. Just see if by chance. Yeah. All the time I'm disappointed here. I have two kind of commentaries, and none of them address the simple questions. Okay, anyway. Rabbi Yossi Omer Kedeche Yehi Matsui La B'chol Ex. And she wanted to keep an eye on Haman at every moment. And Rashi adds another point here, that she was hoping that Haman would make some sort of mistake and she would take advantage of it. Rabbi Shimon ben Asi Omer Ulai Yargish Hamoko V'Yasa Lanu Nes. So she really lowered herself to the lowest level, that she would actually invite this Russia, this enemy of the Jewish people, to a banquet, feed him in a banquet. And then Hashem would certainly have rachamim when he sees how Esther had to demean herself, flattering this evil man. And he'll bring about a miracle. Rabbi Shimon Karch Omer, Asbir lo ponim kidei she'hareg hu v'hi. And this is also a brilliant insight into the whole story of the Megillah. The king would, seeing that she invited Haman, would suspect some intimacy between her and Haman. And as a result, he might have both Haman and Esther executed out of suspicion that she was having some sort of a relationship with Haman. And once again, Rav Soloveitchik builds a lot on this. It's all based on the Malbim, actually, but that the whole story of Purim and the Yeshua came about because she set it up in a way that Achashverosh suspect Haman in every single way. The final clincher is when Haman falls on her bed. You remember that? Agam Lifosh as Malki Babayis. Rav Gamliel Omer Melech Haf the Fachan Ham. This man, Achashverosh, he was a psycho. You couldn't trust him from 1 minute to the other. So she was hoping that if Haman was there and she convinced Achashverosh that he's the enemy, Achashverosh would have him killed immediately. If we wait, he might change his mind. We still need the answer of Elazar Modoi, meaning that she wanted to trap him. Anya, let's read Rabbi Elazar Modoi. Rabbi Elazar Modoi Omer Kinato Bamela Kinato Basar. She was really trying to instigate hatred and jealousy of Haman. Number one, the king would be jealous of Haman, and number two, the various officers in the king's palace would also become jealous of Haman. And hopefully, by arising jealousy, she'll be able to defeat Haman. There'll be so much enmity against Haman. Rabba Omar, the reason why she invited Haman to the banquet is based on a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Based on a pasuk in Mishlei. Lifnei shever gaon. That when you build up someone's ego, then you can bring about his destruction, because the pasuk indicates that before destruction is pride. So she wanted to instigate or stimulate his pride, his self-pride, and that would bring about hopefully his destruction. And Abai V'Rava the Amri Chavayu, they quote a pasuk in Yirmiyah. V'chumam ishis es mishtein. When they are hot, I will prepare their feasts. And the rest of the pasuk says, I will make them drunk, so that they'll be merry and sleep a perpetual sleep and not awaken Hashem. This pasuk is an allusion to Belshazzar, who didn't even survive that one night. And when they came back from the battlefield, they were hot, tired, they drank wine, they got intoxicated, and on that very night, Belshazzar was done away with. So Esther saw that the feasts of the wicked, when they drink wine, can lead up to their destruction. So she invites Haman to the banquet in the hope that his destruction will follow this banquet. However, the Maharsha has a different twist. And he says the following, that Esther saw how in the past Achashverosh's feast had been a trap for Vashti. She hoped that another one of his feasts would entrap Haman. Ashkechei Rabba Baravul Eliyahu. So Rabba Baravul had a meeting with Eliyahu Amanav. Amaleni Esther Kiman Chazia Esther B'Yavlav. Which of the opinions that we gave from the Amoraim and the Tanoim is the one that we should accept as to the answer to the question why she invited Haman to the Mishnah? Amalei. So Eliyahu surprised him and said, Kekulu Tanoi Kekulu Amoraim. All the different reasons are correct. There's no stira here. It's not mutually exclusive. All these reasons contributed to her decision to invite Haman to the mission. And how many sons did Haman have? That's the next Gemara. This Gemara, I can't make sense out of it. Maybe you'll help me. By Sapelem, Haman is Kvodo Shrov for Rov Banav. What's Rov Banav? Large numbers of the sons. Kama, how much is Rov Banav? Omar Rav. Lamed, he had 30 sons. And that's a lot of sons. Asara Mesu, 10 died a natural death. Asara Nitlu, 10 of them were hung up. And Asara, the last 10, Mechazan al Psachim, are literally panhandling, knocking on doors in order to beg for food. So basically, punishment was meted out to all 30 sons in different ways, in three groups of 10. 10 were hung up on the tree, 10 died, and 10 had to beg for food. Rabbanan Amri, Osan Shemachazal Psakim Shivim Havi. The last group of those who had to beg for food was made up not of 10 sons, but rather of 70 sons, which would mean that Haman had 90 sons. And the plot goes to Dechsiv, Sveim Balechem Niskaru. They, a reference to the sons of Haman, who were full, have hired themselves out for bread. So the pasuk says Sveim, right? Those who are satiated, literally, Balechem. However, the Rabbanan are going to reinterpret this word by changing the vocalization. Instead of reading it Sveim, Al Tikri Sveim, Ella Shimon. It's the same exact word. You just change the sin to a shin and a couple of the other vowels, and you end up with 7. Rabbi Bar Abba Omer Kuan Masayim Ushmona Hav. Haman had 208 sons. Shenema Verov Bana. So let's take the word Verov. Reish is 200, Vav is 8, and Beis is 2. So that's 208. But that's only if you read the word Verov without a Vav. So the Gemara asks Verov b'gematria masan v'ar Beis Ahavi. So you jack it up by adding 6. So 6 and 208 is 214. But it says Chaser. In other words, the Megilla left out the letter Vav in the word Varo. So we go back to the original Gematria, and that's 208. Now, I've heard of large families, but 208 sons. Am I meant to take this literally? I don't know. He probably had a lot of wives. It couldn't be from one wife. But I'll tell you what bothers me more than anything here. Why do we have to know this? Like a whole machlokas. Was it 208? Was it 214? Was it 70? Was it 30? You got every number here. I don't know. Sure. There's got to be some deeper meaning to this Gemara. We don't have the keys. God, we don't have the Chassidus. That's what Rav Soloveitch used to always say. We lost the keys to Haggadah. Again, Rabbi Nachman tried to bring back some of the keys. I don't know if he has anything on this Gemara. Maybe he does. It just baffles me. It's the beginning of the 6th chapter, if I remember correctly. Now, the Gemara is bothered by the following. Whenever the word nadada appears and means to say the sleep of someone was disturbed, the reason for disturbed sleep is always indicated in the pasuk. Here, there's no indication as to why Achashverosh had trouble sleeping that night. Somebody leave open the windows and it was a cold night. I mean, what happened exactly? The Torah is really this is also a metaphor for the Malko Shalom. That's why there's special Megillas, that always have the word Melech on the top, because Al Pi Kabbalah, every time it says the word Melech, it is a hidden allusion to the King of Kings. Rabbanan Amri Nadidu Elyonim Nadidu Tachtonim. It means the angels were stirred up, and Achashverosh, as an earthly creature, was stirred up. Rashi says that the angels were resting, and their rest was disturbed because they realized that they had to pray for the salvation of Israel. Rav Amar Shnas HaMelech HaChashverosh Mamash. Let's take this literally. And why was he disturbed? Well, what disturbed his sleep? Naflale milsa b'datei. All of a sudden, something popped into his head. Amar Manda, come on. Tizimnete Esther laHaman. This is very strange that Esther is inviting Haman to this banquet. It's a very intimate banquet. Dilma, perhaps Eitza Kashakli Loye, Dahu Gavra, Lemiktalin. Ahu Gavra, he's talking about himself, Achashverosh, in third person. And perhaps there's an Eitza that they're taking, they're planning this all out. They want to do me under, Lemiktalin, to kill me. And Rav Soloveitchik always used to point out that Achashverosh was he suffered from a lot of psychosis. He was always afraid. That way no one could come near him unless he got the Shavrit Tasov. And he suspected everyone. And probably some of his suspicions were well founded, like Big Sam Seresh. Achashverosh really didn't deserve to be the king, as Vashti pointed out. Hadar Omar Ihachi Lavi Gavra Derachim. If they're plotting to kill me, who's gonna support me? Tavi Modiali, who will inform me of their plot? Hadar Omar. Now he's thinking to himself, if they're planning to kill me, and no one's telling me about it, there must be others who know about it. No one's tipping me off. It's probably because it's not worth it to anyone to tip me off, because Dilma Iki Inish the Ovid Bitivusval Parati. There must be someone else who tipped me off in the past and never got rewarded for it. Therefore, they may know about it. They're not going to inform. They don't want to get in trouble with, in this case, Esther or Haman. Let's see if we can find that someone really was not paid up for notifying Achashverosh about a plot to kill him. And then it says, "Vayu nikroim." Very strange pasuk, and they were read before the king. It should have said, "Vayu korim l'fnei hamelech." What's nikroim? They were read of themselves. What does this mean? The scribe that we're going to learn about in just a minute, who really hated Mordechai and all the Jews for that matter, he may have tampered with the royal records, and he would skip over or maybe even cross out the report about Mordechai, with Big Sam Seresh, that plot to kill the king. And this was all deliberate because he didn't want to see that Mordechai the Jew would be uplifted, would be given such a reward. And then it says, Vayimotze Kasu. Kasu means it was written now. It doesn't say Ksav. It should have said a Ksav that could have been, decades old. So what was written now? I mean, this is the Sefer HaZichronos, which goes back who knows how many, probably centuries. The story said. So why are they saying that it was written now? Alame, we derive from this, and here we take a look at Tezayin. Sheshimshei Mochek. Shimshei is the name of the scribe of the king. And we know this from Sefer Ezra, because he was a scribe to a previous king, the Daryavush. And he was one of the most vicious anti-Semites. He actually convinced Cyrus to halt the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. And later on, when the Jews attempted anew to rebuild it during Achashverosh's time, Shimshai again intervened to halt the construction. And the word mochek here means that he erased from the record book this account of Mordechai saving the life of the king. So imagine he used some sort of whiteout, to remove the whole story of Mordechai, because he was such a bitter enemy of the Jews. Gavriel Kosev, and the Malach came down from Shmayim to fill in the blanks of what was eradicated by Shimshai. Om Rabbi Asi, Dorash Rav Shila, each kfar timrata, uma ksav shalamat shalaskusin shal Yisrael eno nimchak, it's ksav shalamalo kolshke. So if God intervenes and sends Gavriel to fill in the record that was erased, and that's all b'schuson shel Yisrael, and how much more so if there's a ksav lamala up in Shamayim, what we call a ktav ichum, right? Some sort of document that condemns the Jewish people, how much more so that it should become, ksav shalamala, a document up in Shamayim that records the schus of Klal Yisrael, that some good deeds of Klal Yisrael, is kolshkein, certainly it should not be erased. Right? Just like the merit of Mordechai should not be erased, and if a Gavriel came down to fill it in, so too the merits of Klal Yisrael up in Shamayim should not be erased. So what was the response that Achashverosh got when he asked the question, did anybody confer any honor on Mordechai for what he done? Lo nase imo dava. Interesting. The language here is very strange. What does it mean, lo nase imo dava? In other words, as if to say, at least some davar, you should give him some minimum reward. Amar Rava lo b'nei sha'avan shel Mordechai. It's not that these were genuine lovers of Mordechai when they said the words Lo Nasi Mo Davar. El Mipnei Shesonim es Haman. This is Sinas Haman. They hated Haman. And if Mordechai would get a reward from the king, it would upset Haman. So that's the way of getting back at Haman. And he says, this Maharsha, if he would have loved, if they really genuinely loved Mordechai, they would have answered Achashverosh in the same way that he asked, and they would have said no honor or act of dignity has been conferred upon him. But instead they said not a thing, implying that all you have to do, King Achashverosh, is some token appreciation. That's all you have to do. That wouldn't be enough to upset Haman, what they want. In love, very strange. The pasuk says that Haman came to tell the king that he had planned to kill Mordechai on the gallows that Heichin Lo, that he had prepared for him. Who is the Lo? Is it Mordechai? And the Gemara says, Lo Heichin. For himself, he prepared the gallows. Imagine the irony of it. He prepared gallows for his arch enemy Mordechai, and he himself would be hung on those very same gallows. I mean, if that's not Hashgacha min Hashamayim, then what is? So this is all what we call a Nes Nistar. That's what Purim is all about. Now the king gets advice from Haman, to prepare the royal garments and the crown that the king wore and the horse that the king rode on. It's the whole 9 yards. And now Achashverosh turns to him and he says, "Vasei came to Mordechai. Whatever you said, you should do for Mordechai." So now I'm not sure. In Yiddish we have a phrase playing domavat. I'm not sure if the next piece here is that Haman was playing domavat. Manu Mordechai. Who's Mordechai? This is like Espincha Achicha Shahavta Sitzcha or Esrachel Bidcha Ktan, right? So Amalei, so Achashverosh says to my Yehudi, Amalei Tuva Mordechai Ika b'Yehudai. There are many Mordechais. Amalei Hayoshe b'Shar Melech. Okay, now it's clear who Achashverosh was referring to. You can't tell me there's more than one Mordechai Yehudi that's sitting in the Shar Melech. Amalei Sagile b'Chad Diskarta Inami b'Chad Nara. You know what? I made a mistake when I told you that he has to be driven around the whole city on the king's horse, etc., etc. Just it's enough. Sagile, you want to reward him, give him a village. Let him be in charge of collecting all the taxes from one particular village and let him pocket it, or from one river. When they used to cross the river, they had to pay a tax. Yeah, Achashverosh said what you just suggested in addition to what you had told me we should do to the Isha Asher Melech Chafetz Tzipor. Al Tapel Davar Mikol Asher Divar. Everything, both the first and the second. When Haman encountered Mordechai was teaching Torah to the Rabbanim. Machvi is when you take your hand and you make a symbolic gesture. That's teach someone. Ilchas Kmitza l'Rabbanim. The laws of Kmitza in the case of a mincha. We'll soon see this is called a minchas nedava. Came the Chazi Mordechai the apik lekiblei. Mordechai saw that Haman was coming towards him. Visusei. And he's riding the horse's the king's horse. Mechad is Lashon Yira. Bidei. He was overtaken by fear. And Mirsas. He was very scared about this. He said to the rabbis, you know what, move a little bit on the side over here. Hi Risha Lemiktal Nafshi Ka'asi. This wicked person is coming to kill me, and move away because he's like a hot coal, and you'll be burnt if you come too close. But he shaitan is atef Mordechai v'kamle l'tzilusa. So Mordechai seeing that Haman is approaching, and no doubt Haman is interested in killing me. Mordechai wrapped himself up probably with a talus, and he stood up to pray. Also, Haman comes and he sits down. So he waits patiently until Mordechai finishes his davening. He turns to the Talmidim while Mordechai is finishing up his Shmon Esrei, and he asks him, what was the topic that you were discussing? And I'm thinking to myself that, they believed in all sorts of omens and signs, so that Haman wanted to see if maybe he can get a sign based on the topic that they were studying. Amalei, so they told Mordechai, Bisman Shebeis HaMikdash Kayam, when the Mikdash stood, Man de Misnadev Mincha. Maisi, Malay Kumta. If someone, again, we're talking about a Minchas Nedav, which is really interesting because this whole story took place on the first day of Pesach. And they should have been learning the laws of Minchas HaOm. Anyway, it says, Maisi le Milek Mimse, this sultash, like solas is a refined flour. And the Kohen has to dip his hand in and he grabs on to some flower, and that flower is brought under the Mizbeach, umiskaper, and that's going to engender kapar. Amar lahu. I mean, it's very strange that Haman is interested in laws of Kmitza. Also, milei kumtze kimcha ditchu also means it came. Your mole kometz, a fistful of flour, and dochi, and it trumps my asara alfei kikre kasper lidei. In other words, I was paying Achashverosh a large sum of money, 10,000 silver coins that I was willing to pay in order to be able to get license from Achashverosh to destroy the Jews. But I see that your fistful of flour is more powerful than my 10,000 silver talents. And here we have a fantastic insight in the Bach. I don't know if we have, what time is it? Just want to find myself here. All right, so we have, let's say, 5 more minutes. Should I fit in the Bach? I'll try to fit in the Bach. How does Haman come up with this number of 10,000 silver coins? He says the following. This was connected to defeat the power of the Jewish people that they gained from the shkolim, from the Masechet. Now, Masechet had to be given during the course of one's life, but it begins at the age of 20. So let's say the average person will live 50 years. And if he brings 50 half shkolim over the course of his life, that equals 25 shkolim. Now multiply that by 600,000 men, and that's going to give you 25 times 600,000 is 15 million. Now, a kikar of silver is 1,500 shkolim, and therefore 15 million shkolim is equal to 10,000 kikar. Wow. Amalei Russia. Mordechai always calls Haman a Russia. That's how he addressed him. Evid shekonin nechasim, Evid lemina chasim lemi. You're talking about all the money that you have to pay him off. That money is my money, says Mordechai, because you're my slave. That was the more that we had earlier on Taf Tesvav and Aleph. And Mashakona Evid Kona Rab. Amalei levosh hani money rechov al haisusa. Put on these garments and ride the horse. The boilach malka, because this is what the melech wants you to do. Amalei Mordechai turns to him and he says, Lo yachilna. I can't show up in front of in the king's garments the way I look. Adi aile be bane vieshko lemazaya. I have to go to the bathhouse, and I have to cut my hair, because during this period of time I didn't do so out of a sense of mourning. It's not appropriate to wear the royal garments in the state of that I'm in. I have to wash myself, and this reminds us of Yosef. A lot of comparisons between Yosef and Mordechai. Anyway, Shadra, Esther, the Asritinu, Lakulu Bay, Bani Lakulu. She declared a day off, so to speak, for all the bathhouse attendants and all the barbers. She wanted Haman himself to attend to Mordechai personally. So Haman personally brought Mordechai to the bathhouse and bathed him. Haman went and brought his scissors from his house because Shakel Bey Mazye. He started cutting Mordechai's hair. Bahadi the Kashakile Ingad the Isnach. So while he was cutting the hair of Mordechai, Haman felt faint and groaned. Amalei Amai Komisnachas. Why do you groan? which is interesting that Mordechai, in a sense, is interested in a psychological analysis of the mind of Haman. What was this groan? Amalei, so Haman responds, Gavra, he's talking about himself in third person. A man, Vanohi, amongst all his officers, I was the most choshev. And Hashta, now look at my state. L'shavye balone v'sapar, became a bathhouse attendant and a barber. Amalei Rosh, again, whenever Mordechai addresses him, he has to add the word Rosh. V'lav sapar shel kfar kartzum ha'isa. What are you talking about? For more than 2 decades, you were a barber in the village of Kartzum. Oh no, we learned in the Brisa, Haman sapar shel kfar kartzum hava. For Esra v'shtayim shon, for 22 years, he was the barber for the town of Kartzum. Basa the shaklina lamase levinchi lamar lamane. After Haman cut Mordechai's hair, he dressed him in the royal garments. Omalei sak. Sak is like solik, to go up. Urachav, and ride the king's horse. Omalei lo yechil. I've been fasting and I'm weak and I cannot climb onto the king's horse. The Krishna chelai miyamei tanisa. My body is weak from all the days of fasting. His gachin v'solik. Haman had to bend down, and Solik and Mordechai would go up, meaning he would climb on Haman's back. He's Solik Bud. This might be a kiyum of the mitzvah of Mechias HaMolech, that he kicks Haman. Amalei lo ksibluchu. Wait a second. Haman is a big lamb. The Rishonim are always big lamdanim. They know how to quote scriptures. The devil quotes scriptures. So he quotes Pasuk in Mishlei, in Folei Vechal Tisma. Why are you rejoicing when you kick you? Amalei hani milu b'Yisrael. The pasuk says that if your enemies are Jewish, you shouldn't be happy when they get killed. But regarding Amalekim, or maybe Goyim in general, the pasuk in Dvarim, you shall tread upon their high places. He was leading Mordechai through the streets near Haman's house. Chazise brate, and Haman's daughter, the Kaima Igra, she was standing on the roof. Is Savra Haiderochiv Avua. She derived what would have been a logical conclusion. I mean, who's on top of the horse? It must be her father. For Haide Maski command, who's on the bottom that's leading the horse is Mordechai. Shoklat Tzita, the Beis HaKisei. She took a pot that was used for whatever, urine and so forth. V'shadise Aresha de Avua. And she poured it on the head of the person who was leading the horse, thinking it was Mordechai. But it turned out that the one leading the horse was Haman. Doli Eine. Haman raised his eyes, v'chazas the avua. She realized it was her father. Nafla miyigus. She threw herself down from the roof, liagra, to the ground, umesa, and she committed suicide. Mordechai returns to the king's gate, and Haman nidchaf el beso ovel v'chafui rosh. And the word Avil indicates that he was mourning. He was in mourning for the loss of his daughter. Amar Rav Sheshes. Sheshav l'saka l'tanisa. V'hama nivchaf el beso Avil l'chafui rosh. Avil al bito v'chafui rosh al she'irala. On everything that happened to him. V'yisapir Hama l'zeresh ishto. Now she's the worst enemy of the whole book of Megilla. Anyway, Zeresh. Ulechol ohava. Kari lahu ohava. The kari lahu chachama. There are 2 psukim. In one pasuk, it's called his intimate friends. In another pasuk, it's referred to the same people as wise men. Omer Reb Yochanan. Kol Omer dvar chachma afilu bi umos haolam nikra chachma. Even if he's from the nations of the world, but if he gets something right, and he says something wise, he's called a chachma. And Haman's friends replied with chachma. And what did they say to him? In Mizera HaYehudim Mordechai, and you began to fall in front of him, you will not prevail. Amru le, imishar shpatim ka'asi. Which tribe does he come from? If it's from one of the other tribes, with the exception of Yehuda and Binyamin, Yolchasla, you can prevail against it. But Imi Shevet Yehuda Binyamin, which means Ephraim and Menashe, then Lo Yachlis Le, you won't be able to prevail against him. And why? Yehuda, if he comes from Yehuda, the Gemara established that Mordechai came from both Yehuda and Binyamin, is the Ksiv. And this is the blessing that Yaakov bestows upon Yehuda, your hand, Yodecha, Yodcha, V'yoref Oivecha, be at your enemy's name, Enoch. And as far as Binyamin, Ephraim, and Menashe is concerned, the Ksiv Bahu, and the Pasuk says regarding them in Tehillim, Lifnei Ephraim, Binyamin, Menashe, Orera es Gvurasecha, arouse your might. God arouses his might before these tribes, and there's certainly no one will be able to prevail against them. So Mordechai, whose father was from the tribe of Binyamin, his mother from the tribe of Yehuda, will not be defeated. Hinafol tipol lefanu.